right now, somewhere in the Andes Mountains, the sun is sinking. And for just a few minutes, the sky does something that no human painter has ever managed to replicate. The light turns to gold, then copper, then a deep violet that seems to pulse from the inside out. And there, hanging low over the peaks, brighter than anything else in the heavens, a single point of light appears. Not a star, a planet, Venus. The ancient Inca had a name for that light. They called her Chasca, and she was not just a celestial body to them. She was alive. She was a goddess. She was the bridge between the blinding radiance of day and the thick, infinite darkness of night. And what makes Chasca so remarkable, what makes her story unlike almost anything else in the vast library of world mythology, is that she ruled the in-between. Not the sun, not the moon, the transition, that sliver of time where the world holds its breath, where the sky cannot decide if it belongs to the light or to the dark, where everything is changing, but nothing has fully changed yet. That narrow, luminous corridor between what was and what is about to be. Chasca owned that space. She was its author, its keeper, its meaning. And her story, which stretches back more than 600 years into the stone cities and sky temples of the Inca Empire, is one of the most beautiful and least understood tales in all of human mythology. Because to understand Chasca, you have to understand a civilization that did not see the universe the way most of us were taught to see it. You have to understand a people who believed that every mountain had a spirit, that the Milky Way was a great celestial river, that dark patches between stars were living animals drinking from its waters, and that a single bright point of light appearing in the sky at dawn and dusk was proof that the cosmos cared about balance and beauty and the gentleness of change. This is the story of Chasca, the long-haired star, the goddess of Twilight. And if you stay with me through this, you will never look at a sunrise or a sunset the same way again. To understand who Chasca was and what she meant to the people who revered her, we first need to step into the world she inhabited. Not just the physical landscape of the Andes, though that landscape was staggering in its own right, but the conceptual world, the philosophical architecture that the Inca and their ancestors built over thousands of years to explain how reality worked. Because the Inca did not draw a hard line between the physical and the spiritual. They did not separate religion from agriculture, or politics from astronomy, or the movement of stars from the movement of daily life. Everything was woven together into a single, coherent vision of how the universe operated. And that vision was breathtaking in its scope. The Inca Empire, which they called Tawantinsuyu, meaning the realm of the four parts, flourished in the Andes Mountains of South America from roughly the early 14th century until the Spanish conquest in the mid-15th century. At its peak, it stretched from present-day Colombia in the north all the way down to central Chile and northwestern Argentina in the south. A distance of more than 2,500 miles. It was the largest empire in pre-Columbian America, and it was governed from a single capital, the city of Cusco, which the Inca considered to be the navel of the world. Cusco itself was designed in the shape of a puma, one of 3 sacred animals in the Andean worldview. And the entire city was organized along astronomical lines, with its streets and temples aligned to the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. This was a civilization that took the sky seriously. At the foundation of Inca thought was a principle called Yanantin. This is a Quechua word, and it does not translate neatly into English. The closest approximation would be something like complementary opposites, but even that does not quite capture it. Yanantin is the idea that the polarities of existence, things like light and dark, male and female, upper and lower, hot and cold, are not enemies. They are not in conflict. They are instead interdependent halves of a single, harmonious whole. One cannot exist without the other. One does not triumph over the other. They need each other. They complete each other, and the goal of a well-lived life, a well-ordered society, a properly functioning cosmos, is not to choose one side over the other, but to bring them into balance. This principle of duality ran through everything in Inca civilization. The empire itself was divided into 4 quarters. Cusco was divided into 2 halves, Hanan, meaning roughly upper, superior, right, masculine, and Huron, meaning roughly lower, inferior, left, feminine. These were not value judgments. They were organizational categories, and both halves were necessary. The sun had its counterpart in the moon. The condor had its counterpart in the serpent. Day had its counterpart at night, and the entire cosmos was organized into 3 interconnected worlds, 3 planes of reality that were bound together in an endless cycle of exchange and reciprocity. The first of these worlds was Hanan Pacha, the upper world. This was the celestial realm, the domain of the sky, the place where the gods and the stars lived. The condor, the largest flying bird in the Western Hemisphere, represented this world because it soared at the greatest heights and seemed to touch the heavens. In Hanan Pacha lived Inti, the sun god, Mamaquilla, the moon goddess, and the countless stars and planets that the Inca watched with obsessive precision. Chasca lived here too, burning bright in the space between the domains of her celestial parents. The second world was Pacha, the world of the here and now. This was the surface of the earth, the place where human beings lived and worked and farmed and loved and died. The puma represented this world, a creature of power and intelligence that walked the land with authority. Pacha was the realm of the tangible, the immediate, the real. It was where the harvests grew, where the rivers ran, where the cities stood. The third world was Pacha, the inner world, the world below. This was the domain of the dead, the unborn, and the seeds that had not yet sprouted. The serpent represented this world, a creature that moved through the earth and shed its skin in an act of perpetual renewal. Pacha was not a place of punishment, not a hell in the European sense. It was a place of origin and return, a source of transformation. The dead went there, but so did the potential for new life. It was the root system of the cosmos, the hidden foundation on which everything else depended. And at the very top of this cosmological order, above even Inti and the celestial deities, stood the great creator, god Viracocha. His full name in Quechua was Apu Kan Tixi Wuraquichapachachachik, which translates to something like Great Lord, Eternal Light, Source of Life, Knowledge, and creator of the world. According to Inca mythology, Viracocha came from the sea and created the sun, the moon, and the stars to bring light to a world that had been drowning in darkness. He created time itself, ordering the sun to move across the sky, and he created humanity by breathing life into stones. Though his first attempt failed because the beings he made were violent and unintelligent giants. Unsatisfied, Viracocha destroyed them with a great flood and started over, fashioning smaller, wiser humans from the clay near Lake Titicaca, which the Inca considered the birthplace of civilization. In one version of the story, Viracocha had a son named Inti, the sun god, and two daughters, Mamaquilla, the moon, and Pachamama, the earth. This placed Chasca within a lineage that stretched back to the very beginning of time. She was not a minor deity tacked on to an existing system. She was embedded in the foundational structure of creation, a necessary component of the cosmic machinery that Viracocha had set in motion, and her role, bridging the gap between the sun's domain and the moon's domain, between the harshness of full daylight and the mystery of total darkness, was essential to the functioning of the whole. These three worlds were not sealed off from each other. They were in constant communication, constantly flowing into one another. And the points of transition between them, the moments where one world touched another, were considered sacred. The surface of a lake, where the upper world was reflected in the lower. The mouth of a cave, where the inner world opened into the outer. The moment of dawn, where darkness became light. The moment of twilight, where light became darkness. These liminal spaces, these thresholds, were the most holy places and times in the Inca calendar. And it was precisely in these thresholds that Chasca made her home. Now, let us talk about her name. In Quechua, the language of the Inca, and still spoken today by millions of people across the Andes, the word Chasca means star, though some scholars believe the more precise meaning is something closer to bright or shining. The name was used interchangeably for the planet Venus, which, after the sun and the moon, is the brightest object visible in the sky with the naked eye. The Inca called Venus by several names, and the most common full title for the goddess associated with it was Chasca, which translates roughly to Venus star or shining star in the Hispanicized form used by colonial-era chroniclers and modern writers. The name appears as Chasca, sometimes spelled Chasca, and occasionally rendered as Chasca or Chasca. But these were not her only names. Across the vast Andean world, where different communities and ethnic groups maintained their own traditions, even within the framework of the Inca state, Chasca was known by several titles that each illuminated a different facet of her character. She was sometimes called Apu Chasca, with Apu being a title of great honor typically reserved for the spirits of mountains, suggesting that her importance rivaled even the great mountain deities. She was also sometimes referred to simply as the long-haired star, a name that evokes one of her most distinctive visual features. The way Venus, when seen low on the horizon through the thick atmosphere of dawn or dusk, appears to shimmer and radiate light in a way that can resemble flowing hair. That image of a radiant young woman with long, flowing hair became central to how the Inca depicted and imagined her. And this is important because the Inca did not see Chasca as an abstraction. She was not a concept or a metaphor. She was, in their understanding, a living being. The planet Venus was not merely named after a goddess. It was the goddess. When they looked up at the sky and saw that brilliant point of light hovering above the mountains at dawn, they were looking at Chasca herself. She was right there, visible, tangible in a way that few deities in any mythology can claim to be. Every morning, every evening, weather permitting, you could step outside and see her. You could track her movements across the sky. You could watch her appear and disappear as the seasons changed. She was not hidden behind temple walls or locked inside sacred texts. She was up there, burning, for anyone who cared to look. In the celestial hierarchy of the Inca, Chasca occupied a position of tremendous importance, precisely because of the deities she was connected to. She was intimately associated with Inti, the sun god, who was the supreme deity of the Inca state. Inti was the patron god of the empire, the divine ancestor of the Inca ruling dynasty, and the source of all light, warmth, and agricultural fertility. The Sapa Inca, the emperor himself, was considered to be the living son of Inti, a divine descendant whose authority to rule was legitimized by his solar bloodline. Everything in Inca political and religious life revolved around the sun. The greatest temples were built for him. The most lavish festivals celebrated him. The most precious offerings, including gold, which the Inca called the sweat of the sun, were dedicated to him. Chasca's relationship with Inti is described in various sources as that of a consort, a servant, or a collaborator. Some traditions describe her as his wife, standing beside him in the celestial hierarchy as a complementary partner, a feminine counterpart to his masculine radiance. Other traditions describe her more as a handmaiden or attendant, a figure who served the sun by performing tasks that the sun himself could not. This is where her role becomes uniquely poignant and fascinating, because while Inti was the source of blazing, overwhelming midday power, Chasca was the goddess of the gentle light. She was credited with creating the dawn and the twilight, those moments when the sun's power is muted, softened, diffused into something that the human eye can actually bear to look at. She was, in a sense, the humanizer of the sun's power, the one who made his light bearable, beautiful, and nurturing rather than blinding and destructive. And she was also connected to Mama Quilla, the moon goddess, who was the sister wife of Inti and the regulator of women's menstrual cycles, the guardian of the lunar calendar, and a powerful deity in her own right. The Temple of the Moon in the Great Coricancha complex in Cusco was paneled entirely in silver, just as the Temple of the Sun was covered in gold. Where Inti governed the solar calendar and the affairs of state, Mama Quilla governed the lunar calendar and the rhythms of feminine life. Chasca moved between these two great powers. She appeared in the sky when the sun was near the horizon, when day was becoming night or night was becoming day. She was neither fully solar nor fully lunar. She was both. She was the meeting point. This is where Chasca's connection to the planet Venus becomes deeply meaningful on an astronomical level. Venus, because of its orbit inside the orbit of Earth, never strays far from the sun as seen from our planet's surface. You will never see Venus at midnight, high in the sky, the way you can see Jupiter or Mars. Venus always appears close to the sun, either rising just before the sun in the morning or setting just after the sun in the evening. This is why it was called the morning star and the evening star. And this is why Chasca was the goddess of dawn and twilight. Her celestial body literally only appears during those transitional moments. She is astronomically bound to the threshold. She cannot escape it. She belongs there. The Inca were meticulous observers of Venus, according to the 16th century chronicler Joseph de Acosta, who was one of the only Spanish writers to systematically record the Incas' planetary knowledge. The Incas recognized 5 planets, which they called the walking stars, because these objects seemed to move against the background of fixed stars. Venus was the most prominent among them. In the morning, when it appeared before sunrise, they called it Chasca Coiler, and they associated it with the quality of something old or ancestral. Perhaps because the morning appearance of Venus seemed to carry the wisdom of the night that had just passed. In the evening, when it appeared after sunset, they called it by a different name, and some sources associate this evening appearance with a golden feline figure, perhaps an ocelot or jaguar, suggesting a more wild, mysterious, untamed quality. This dual nature of Venus, appearing as 2 seemingly different celestial objects, is a phenomenon that fascinated ancient cultures around the world. Many civilizations initially believed that the morning star and the evening star were 2 separate bodies. The ancient Sumerians, as far back as 5,000 years ago, realized that both were the same planet, and they associated it with their goddess Inanna. But what is remarkable about the Inca understanding is that they seem to have grasped this unity early on, recognizing Chasca as a single goddess with 2 faces, 2 moods, 2 roles, one for the morning and one for the evening, united in a single divine identity. This aligns perfectly with the principle of Yanantin. 2 aspects, seemingly opposite, exist in perfect complementary balance within a single whole. The Incas' broader astronomical knowledge was extraordinary by any standard. They were what scholars call a horizon-based culture, meaning they tracked celestial bodies primarily by observing where they rose, and set against the backdrop of the mountains. They built carefully placed stone pillars on the hills and ridges surrounding Cusco. And when the sun rose or set between specific pairs of pillars, the astronomer priests knew it was time to plant at a particular altitude or to begin preparations for a particular festival. The entire city of Cusco functioned as a kind of astronomical instrument. Its streets and temples aligned with the movements of the cosmos. But what truly set the Inca apart from most other ancient astronomical traditions was their recognition of dark constellations. Most cultures identify constellations by connecting bright stars into patterns, the way the Greeks saw Orion and the Big Dipper. The Inca did this too, but they also looked at the dark patches within the Milky Way, which they called Mayu, the celestial river, and saw living animals in those shadows. They identified a llama and its baby, a fox, a toad, a serpent, and a partridge, all silhouetted against the luminous river of stars. These dark constellations were believed to be actual celestial animals that came to drink from the Milky Way's waters, and their act of drinking was thought to generate fertility and abundance on Earth below. The Milky Way itself, which is spectacularly visible from the high Andes, where artificial light is almost non-existent, was understood as a heavenly counterpart to the terrestrial rivers that fed the farmlands of the empire. It was a celestial irrigation system, sustaining the divine livestock that in turn sustained the earthly ones. Chasca's identification as a walking star, a planet that moved against this backdrop of fixed stars and dark constellations, gave her a special dynamism. She was not static. She did not stay in one place. She moved through the sky in patterns that the Inca tracked with immense precision, and her movements were understood as purposeful, intentional, and meaningful. When she appeared in the morning sky, she was announcing the arrival of the sun. When she appeared in the evening sky, she was escorting the sun into its nightly rest. She was, in astronomical terms, forever chasing or being chased by the sun, never straying far from its light, always appearing at the moments of greatest visual drama, the moments when the sky was most vividly painted with color. But Chasca was far more than a celestial light. Her domains extended deep into the earthly world and into the lives of the people who revered her. She was the goddess of flowers, and this was not a merely decorative title. In Inca theology, Chasca's connection to Inti meant that she participated in the process by which sunlight became sustenance. Working alongside Inti, she was believed to use her gentle, diffused light, the light of dawn and dusk, to draw sprouts from the ground and inspire blossoms. If Inti provided the raw power, the blazing energy that made photosynthesis possible, Chasca provided the tenderness. She was the soft light that coaxed the first green shoots through the soil. She was the warm glow that opened petals. She was the reason that flowers turned their faces toward the horizon at dawn and at dusk, not toward the harsh midday sun. According to Inca tradition, Chasca communicated with her people through the weather, and specifically through the clouds and through the dew. As the mistress of the morning, the dew she cast upon the earth at dawn was understood to be a form of divine communication, a message from the goddess herself. When the fields glistened with morning moisture, that was Chasca's blessing. When clouds formed in particular patterns at dawn or dusk, people believed they could read her intentions, a form of atmospheric divination that connected the sky to the crops, the goddess to the farmer, the celestial to the practical. She was also the protector of virgins and young girls. This association connects her to one of the most distinctive institutions of the Inca Empire, the Eclaz, or chosen women. Every year, Inca officials traveled through the provinces of the empire, selecting girls around the age of 8 or 10 based on their beauty, intelligence, and skill. These girls were taken from their families and brought to special compounds called Eclawasi, houses of the chosen women, where they were trained for approximately 4 years in religion, spinning, weaving, food preparation, and the brewing of chicha, the fermented corn beer that was essential to Inca religious ceremonies. The Aclaz occupied a unique and privileged position in Inca society. Some became mamaconas, priestesses who lived out their lives in service to the gods. Others were given in marriage to men who had distinguished themselves in service to the empire. The most beautiful and skilled were sent to Cusco, to the great Coricancha temple complex, where they served as attendants of the sun and the other celestial deities. And a few, described in the sources as the most perfect, were selected as human sacrifices for the most important religious rites. A fate that, within the Inca worldview, was considered a supreme honor. These young women were required to maintain strict celibacy, and Chasca, as the protector of virgins and maidens, watched over them. Her role as guardian was not passive. She was understood to be actively involved in their well-being, shielding them from harm, blessing their work, and ensuring that their purity, which was essential to the spiritual health of the empire, remained intact. The connection between Chasca and these young women reinforced her identity as a goddess of beauty, youth, potential, and the sacred quality of things that have not yet been touched or changed. Just as the Twilight is a moment of unspoiled transition, the Aclaz were women held in a state of untouched potential, and Chasca presided over both. And she was associated with love. This connection to love and desire links Chasca to Venus goddesses across the world, a pattern so consistent that it demands attention. In Inca tradition, Chasca's collaboration with Inti was not merely functional. It was described in terms that suggest a deep, creative partnership, almost a romantic one. Together, they brought life from the soil. Together, they made the world bloom. The Inca frequently depicted Chasca as a radiant and youthful woman, adorned in garments that captured the vivid colors of dawn and dusk. Her attire was said to feature shades of orange, pink, and purple, mirroring the sky's hues during those liminal moments she governed. She was described as having wavy or flowing hair, a detail that connects back to her astronomical identity. The shimmering, radiating quality of Venus when seen through the atmosphere near the horizon. She was shown carrying a mirror, which some scholars interpret as a symbol of reflection and self-knowledge. And she was adorned with flowers, the very blossoms she was believed to have brought into existence through her partnership with the sun. The fires that were lit during festivals honoring Chasca carried a specific ritual purpose. People would throw old objects, especially old clothing, into the flames, burning away the residue of the past to make room for new beginnings. Fire itself held great significance in Inca culture, symbolizing purification and the ability to transform. The Inca fire rituals conducted in Chasca's honor were understood as a means to release negative energies and cleanse the spirit. There was a belief that through fire, one could transform misfortune into renewed possibility, that the destructive aspect of flame was not an end, but a doorway. This is a deeply sophisticated spiritual concept, and it connects Chasca not just to beauty and gentleness, but to the harder, more demanding aspects of change. Transformation is not always comfortable. Sometimes it requires burning something down so that something new can grow from the ashes. The goddess of Twilight understood this because twilight itself is a kind of beautiful destruction, the slow, gorgeous dismantling of the day to make way for the night. During celebrations dedicated to Chasca, offerings were made to the goddess, and people danced through the night around fire pits. Gifts were presented to honor her, and the dancing and the flames together created a sense of communal renewal. There was a sense of renewal in these gatherings, a feeling that the turning of the light, the arrival of dawn after darkness, the appearance of that single bright star on the horizon was a promise that things could begin again. That damage could be undone, that the world, like the sky, was always in the process of becoming. The ancient Inca believed that Chasca would speak to them through the weather, particularly the clouds. When the sun shone brightly and flowers bloomed across the terraced hillsides, the people rejoiced, reading these signs as evidence of Chasca's favor. When the clouds gathered in particular formations at dawn or twilight, they studied them for messages, seeking guidance in the patterns of light and vapor that the goddess painted across the sky. Now, to fully appreciate Chasca's significance, we need to visit the place where she was most formally honored. The Coricancha, the Golden Temple, the most sacred building in the entire Inca Empire. Located in the heart of Cusco, the Coricancha was not merely a temple. It was the spiritual, geographic, and political center of the Tawantinsuyu. Everything radiated from it, 41 sec lines, sacred pathways that functioned as religious, political, and administrative highways, stretched outward from the Coricancha into the four quarters of the empire, connecting 328 sacred sites called huacas in a vast network of worship and governance. The name Coricancha comes from two Quechua words, curi, meaning worked gold, and cancha, meaning temple or enclosed place. The Golden Temple, and the name was not an exaggeration, according to multiple Spanish chroniclers who saw the temple before it was looted. The walls of the Coricancha were covered in sheets of gold. Over 700 gold plates adorned its surfaces, each one depicting one of the divine Inca gods. The most sacred chamber, the Temple of the Sun, contained a massive golden disc representing Inti, with rays and flames radiating from a central face, studded with gems and precious stones. This disc was positioned so that the first rays of the morning sun would strike it and fill the entire room with reflected golden light. The chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, himself the son of an Inca princess and a Spanish conquistador, wrote that the temple also housed the embalmed bodies of past Inca rulers, placed in order of succession on golden chairs and tables, so that the dead emperors seemed to be sitting in eternal council with the living God whose light bathed them each morning. But perhaps the most astonishing feature of the Coricancha was its garden. This was no ordinary garden. It was a full-scale recreation of the natural world, rendered entirely in precious metals. Life-sized golden stalks of corn rose from the soil. Golden llamas and their shepherds stood among the crops. Golden butterflies and golden birds rested on golden flowers. There were golden jaguars, golden monkeys, and golden serpents. Even the soil itself was said to have been composed of small pieces of fine gold. This garden was a tribute to Viracocha, the creator god, and to the fertility that the celestial deities bestowed upon the earth. It was the entire living world, frozen in gold, a miniature cosmos contained within the walls of the temple. And it is worth pausing for a moment to consider what this garden represented. It was not merely a display of wealth, it was a theological statement. It said that the natural world, the world of plants and animals and soil and sunlight, was sacred enough to be rendered in the most precious material the Inca possessed. It said that the work of the gods, the work of Inti and Chasca and Pachamama in making things grow, was worthy of the highest honor that human hands could offer. But the Coricancha was not dedicated solely to the sun. It housed multiple shrines, each devoted to a different celestial deity. There was the Temple of the Moon, paneled entirely in silver, containing a silver disc with a woman's face. There was the Temple of Lightning, dedicated to the thunder god Alapa. There was the Temple of the Rainbow, and there was a temple dedicated specifically to Venus and the stars, where Chasca was honored. This temple, described in colonial sources, was separated from the Temple of the Moon by a beautiful alleyway and was devoted to the worship of Venus, the Pleiades, which the Inca called Calca, meaning storehouse, and all the other stars. It was here, according to historical references, that the Inca would sometimes position himself to be deified, or to witness the festivals and sacrifices performed in the rectangular courtyard below. The Pleiades, Chasca's stellar siblings, held a special importance in Inca agricultural life. The Inca watched the Pleiades with extraordinary care, and their observations were not merely spiritual. They were practical. Andean farmers, including the Cuero people, who are direct descendants of the ancient Inca and still live in remote high-altitude villages in Peru, continue to this day to observe the Pleiades during their heliacal rising in mid-June. If the star cluster reappears large and bright, they expect a year of abundant rainfall and a plentiful harvest. If the Pleiades appear small and hazy, dimmed by high-altitude cirrus clouds, the farmers know to delay planting by several weeks because the rains will be sparse and late. This is not superstition. In a remarkable cross-disciplinary study published in the journal American Scientist, researchers confirmed that the Pleiades observation method achieves weather prediction accuracy of approximately 65%, which actually exceeds the accuracy of modern scientific forecasts for precipitation over the Andean highlands during similar lead times, which range from 55 to 60%. The reason is that the haziness of the Pleiades during an El Niño year is caused by increased moisture from the warmer Pacific Ocean feeding into the upper atmosphere, creating thin cirrus clouds that are invisible to the naked eye, but that subtly dim the star cluster. The Inca and their descendants had discovered this relationship empirically through centuries of meticulous observation, and they embedded that knowledge into their religious calendar, their agricultural practices, and the mythology of Chasca and her stellar kin. The Coricancha was also built with extraordinary astronomical precision. Its walls and windows were aligned to track specific celestial events, including solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of particular constellations. The stonework, built using the Incas' signature ashlar technique, in which stones were cut so precisely that they fit together without mortar, was engineered to withstand earthquakes and has survived numerous seismic events that destroyed the Spanish colonial structures built on top of it. After the conquest, the Dominican order built the church and convent of Santo Domingo directly on the Inca foundations. And today visitors to Cusco can see both structures layered together. The smooth, earthquake-proof Inca walls supporting the ornate, but structurally fragile Spanish church above. It is one of the most vivid physical metaphors in all of architecture. The indigenous foundation, enduring and precise, bearing the weight of the colonial superstructure that tried to replace it. Now, the story of Chasca becomes even more fascinating when we place it in a global context. Because Chasca is not the only Venus goddess in the history of human civilization. She is part of a pattern so widespread, so consistent, so deeply embedded in the mythology of cultures around the world, that it suggests something fundamental about the way human beings relate to this particular celestial body. In ancient Sumer, roughly 5,000 years ago, the goddess Inanna was worshipped as the deity of love, fertility, and war. She was associated with the planet Venus, and her most common symbol was the 8-pointed star. In her earliest forms, Inanna was venerated in two distinct aspects: morning Inanna and evening Inanna, reflecting the two appearances of Venus in the sky. Over time, the Sumerians recognized that these were two manifestations of a single goddess, and Inanna's mythology grew to encompass all the wild contradictions implied by that duality: love and war, creation and destruction, desire and wrath. She was young, beautiful, and impulsive. She descended to the underworld and returned. She moved between worlds, just as Venus moves between the morning and evening sky. When the Akkadians and Babylonians inherited Sumerian culture, Inanna became Ishtar. Her character grew more complex, more politically significant, more cosmically ambitious. Ishtar was invoked by kings going to war. She was the patron of sacred sexuality. She was surrounded by death and disaster, but also by beauty and ecstasy. Her mythology, particularly the famous descent of Ishtar to the underworld, mirrors the astronomical behavior of Venus, which disappears from the sky for several days during its inferior conjunction with the sun before reappearing on the opposite horizon. In the myth, Ishtar descends through 7 gates, removing one garment or piece of jewelry at each gate until she arrives naked and powerless in the realm of the dead. Her absence from the upper world causes all fertility to cease, all love to wither, all reproduction to stop. She must be rescued and returned, and when she is, life resumes. This story has been interpreted as a mythological encoding of Venus's synodic cycle, its periodic disappearance and reappearance. And if that interpretation is correct, it means that the Mesopotamians were embedding precise astronomical observation into their sacred narratives more than 4,000 years ago. From Ishtar, the Venus goddess archetype spread outward through the ancient Mediterranean world. She became Astarte among the Phoenicians, a goddess of fertility and war whose worship extended across the Levant and into North Africa. She became Aphrodite among the Greeks, who initially knew Venus as two separate entities: Phosphoros, the dawnbringer, and Hesperos, the evening star. It was not until the Hellenistic period that Greek astronomers confirmed what the Sumerians had known millennia earlier, that both were the same celestial body. Aphrodite herself, according to the poet Hesiod, was born from the foam of the sea after the severed body of the sky god Uranus fell into the waters. An origin story that connects her simultaneously to the heavens and the ocean, to violence and beauty, to destruction and creation. She became Venus among the Romans, who gave the planet the name it still carries today. The Romans considered the planet particularly sacred to their love goddess, and in Latin, the morning star was called Lucifer, meaning light bringer, a name that carried no negative connotations whatsoever until centuries later, when Christian theology reinterpreted it. Julius Caesar claimed Venus as his personal divine patron and ancestor, linking his political dynasty to the goddess of love and the planet that bore her name. Virgil, in his epic poem The Aeneid, describes Venus guiding the Trojan prince Aeneas to Italy in her heavenly form, the morning star, shining brightly in the daylight sky. She was a compass, a guide, a promise of safe arrival. Across the Atlantic, the Maya of Mesoamerica developed what was perhaps the most obsessive Venus-watching tradition in all of human history. For the Maya, Venus was called Chak-ek, the great star, and it was considered possibly even more important than the sun. The Maya tracked its movements with astonishing precision, building an almanac in the Dresden Codex that mapped Venus's full cycle in 5 sets of 584 days each, after which the patterns repeated. They timed their wars based on Venus's position. The heliacal rising of Venus was an occasion of dread and awe, believed to bring disease and destruction. The 16th century Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagun recorded that when Venus first appeared in the morning sky, the Aztecs would seal the doors and windows of their homes, terrified that its rays might bring sickness or evil. This stands in stark contrast to Chasca, whose appearance at dawn was greeted not with fear, but with reverence and tenderness, a reminder that different cultures could look at the same celestial body and see radically different things. In the ancient Near East, the planet Venus was personified as the male deity Ater among the Canaanites. In a myth from the Ugaritic Baal cycle, Ater attempts to occupy the throne of the god Baal after Baal's death, but he proves too small for the seat and descends to rule the earth instead. This narrative has been interpreted as a metaphor for Venus's inferior position relative to the sun, its ambitious but ultimately subordinate brightness. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Isaiah uses imagery that scholars believe borrows from this Canaanite myth when condemning the king of Babylon, addressing him as the morning star, son of the dawn, who tried to raise his throne above the stars of God, but was cast down to the earth. The Latin Vulgate translation of this passage rendered the Hebrew word Helel as Lucifer, the light bringer, and centuries of Christian reinterpretation transformed what was originally a Venus metaphor into the name of the fallen angel. The planet of love became through a chain of translations and theological shifts, the planet of the devil. It is one of the most dramatic reversals of meaning in the history of human thought, and it underscores just how much cultural context shapes the way we interpret the same natural phenomena. In Australia, the Yolngu people of the Northern Territory call Venus Barnumber. They believe that as she approaches in the early hours before dawn, she draws behind her a rope of light attached to the earth. And along this rope, with the aid of a decorated morning star pole, the living can communicate with their dead loved ones, showing them that they are still remembered and still loved. It is one of the most tender Venus myths in the world. And then there is Chasca, far to the south, in the high Andes, in a civilization that had no contact with Sumer or Rome or the Yolngu, and yet she shares with all of them the same essential qualities: beauty, love, the threshold between worlds, the bridge between light and dark, the connection between the living and something beyond. The consistency of this pattern across cultures that had no contact with each other is one of the great unsolved mysteries of comparative mythology. Why does Venus, of all the planets, so reliably produce a goddess of love and transition? Is it the planet's brightness, its proximity to the sun, its appearance at those emotionally charged moments of dawn and dusk? Or is there something deeper at work, something about the human psyche that responds to that particular light in that particular moment and reaches, instinctively, for the same set of meanings? We may never know the answer, but the question itself is beautiful. And Chasca, standing in the Andes with her long hair streaming like light, is one of its most luminous expressions. The world that Chasca inhabited, the world of golden temples and astronomical precision and philosophical duality, came to a catastrophic end in the 16th century. The Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire was one of the most consequential events in the history of the Western Hemisphere, and its effects on Inca religion, including the worship of Chasca, were devastating. The beginning of the end came with diseases. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, carried across the Atlantic by European explorers and traders, raced through the indigenous populations of the Americas with terrifying speed. The Inca had no immunity. Entire communities were wiped out. The Emperor Huayna Capac and his designated heir both died, probably of smallpox, sparking a brutal civil war between the two remaining sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, which fractured the empire at precisely the moment when it needed to be unified. It was into this chaos that Francisco Pizarro arrived in 1532 with approximately 168 Spanish soldiers. At the Battle of Cajamarca, Pizarro captured Atahualpa in a carefully planned ambush, killing thousands of unarmed Inca attendants in the process. Atahualpa offered an enormous ransom, enough gold to fill a large room and twice that volume in silver. Pizarro accepted the ransom and executed the emperor anyway. The gold of the Coricancha, the golden sheets that had covered its walls, the golden statues from its garden, the golden disc of Inti himself, all of it was melted down and shipped to Spain. The most sacred objects of an entire civilization were reduced to bullion. What followed was a systematic campaign to to erase the Inca religion. Spanish missionaries arrived, carrying a faith that tolerated no rivals. Temples were demolished. Sacred sites were desecrated. Churches were built on top of Inca foundations, a deliberate act of symbolic domination. The Dominican order built the Church of Santo Domingo directly on the ruins of the Coricancha, using Inca stonework as its foundation. The Inti Raymi festival, the most important celebration in the Inca calendar, a 9-day spectacle of processions, dances, banquets, and sacred rituals that had been instituted by the Emperor Pachacutec in the 15th century, was banned as an act of pagan idolatry. The last official Inti Raymi, with an Inca emperor presiding, was performed by Atahualpa shortly before his execution. In 1572, the Viceroy Francisco de Toledo formally prohibited the ceremony, and the celebrations went underground. The colonial authorities also instituted what they called the extirpation of idolatry, a traveling inquisition specifically targeting indigenous religious practices. Priests and officials fanned out across the Andes, destroying sacred objects, burning ritual materials, confiscating ancestor mummies, and punishing anyone caught practicing traditional rites. They destroyed what they called the instruments of idolatry, including sacred figures, ancestral remains, and sacrificial materials. Father Pablo José de Arriaga wrote a detailed instruction manual for these extirpators, a book called The Extirpation of Idolatry in Peru, which told priests exactly how to identify and destroy Andean spiritual practices. The Father Francisco de Avila's Huaracri manuscript, one of the most important surviving documents of Andean mythology, was itself created as a tool of destruction. Written in Quechua to help the colonizers understand indigenous beliefs well enough to eradicate them. The irony is profound. The very documents that sought to destroy Andean religion are now among our best sources for understanding it. And yet, the old beliefs did not die. They could not be killed because they were woven too deeply into the land, the language, the daily rhythms of Andean life. What happened instead was something remarkable, a process of syncretism in which Andean people blended their ancient beliefs with the new Catholic framework, hiding their gods inside the costumes of Christian saints. The mountain spirits, the Apis, were re-identified as Christ. Pachamama, the Earth Mother, was merged with the Virgin Mary. In the Cusco Cathedral, a famous painting of the Last Supper by the Quechua artist Marcos Zapata shows Jesus serving kai, roasted guinea pig, the traditional Andean ceremonial dish, to his disciples. The Virgin Mary appears in paintings wearing a cloak shaped like a mountain, with llamas and vicuñas frolicking along its hem. The traditional cross, which for indigenous people represented destruction and conquest, was reimagined. A particular figure, the Lord of the Earthquakes, a dark-skinned Christ whose face was darkened by centuries of candle smoke in the Cusco Cathedral, became an object of special devotion, precisely because indigenous people believed this iteration of Christ could communicate with Pachamama. They celebrated separate masses before this figure, decorating the altar with fresh flowers and new offerings. These are not acts of surrender. They are acts of resistance, carried out with subtlety and persistence across generations. The indigenous artists and worshippers were saying, in the only language the colonizers would tolerate, that their gods were still alive. Chasca survived this process in quieter, less visible ways. Her name lived on in the Quechua language, where Chasca still means star. Venus still rises over the Andes at dawn and dusk, and the farmers who watch the Pleiades to time their planting still carry, in their observations, the echo of a tradition that connects them to the astronomer priests who once served in the golden halls of the Coricancha. The festivals that once honored the celestial deities have been adapted, reworked, overlaid with Catholic saints' days, but never fully erased. In many rural Andean communities, Quechua remained the primary language throughout the colonial period and beyond. And with the language came the names of the old gods, spoken softly but never forgotten. The Inti Raymi itself was revived in 1944, thanks largely to the efforts of the Cusquenan artist and intellectual Humberto Vidal Anda, who proposed dramatizing the ancient ceremony. The first reenactment was directed by Faustino Espinosa Navarro, who himself played the role of the Sapa Inca, and the reconstruction was based primarily on the detailed accounts left by Garcilaso de la Vega in his royal commentaries of the Incas, one of the most important historical books about the customs and rituals of ancient Peru. What began as a modest theatrical performance has since grown into the second largest festival in all of South America, celebrated every June 24th in Cusco, and attracting tens of thousands of visitors from Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and around the world. More than 700 performers participate, dressed in elaborate traditional costumes, performing dances and chants entirely in Quechua, the ancestral language of the Inca. In 2001, it was declared a cultural heritage of the nation by the Peruvian government. And on March 2nd of that year, the festival was formally recognized as an essential expression of Andean cultural identity. The modern ceremony unfolds across 3 sacred sites in Cusco, following the same route every June 24th. It begins at the Coricancha, where the greeting to the sun ceremony takes place. As dawn illuminates the ancient walls, conch shells called putudos sound across the city. The Aclaz, musicians, and dancers enter in procession, followed by the appearance of the Inca himself, carried on a ceremonial litter. This first portion lasts approximately 45 minutes, and it takes place in the very spot where the Golden Temple once stood, where the shrine to Venus and the stars once caught the first light of morning. The procession then moves to the Plaza de Armas, the main square of Cusco, where a ritual coca leaf reading is performed to divine the empire's fortunes for the coming year, a ceremony called the Encounter of the Times. Finally, the entire assembly moves to the massive Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman, perched on a hill overlooking the city, where the climactic ceremony takes place against a backdrop of enormous, precisely fitted stone monoliths. Here, the Inca presides over the offering ritual, which culminates in the symbolic sacrifice of a llama, a practice that was once performed in earnest, but is now conducted purely as a theatrical reenactment. In deference to modern sensibilities, the high priest holds the symbolic offering in honor of Pachamama, and the ceremony ends with a procession back to Cusco as the afternoon sun begins its descent toward the western mountains. And within that festival, within the rituals that open at the Coricancha at dawn and move through the Plaza de Armas to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, there are echoes of Chasca. The ceremony begins as the sun rises. The Aclaz, the chosen women, enter in procession. Musicians play quenas, the Andean flutes and drums. The light is soft, golden, and transitional. It is Twilight's light. It is Chasca's light. And even if her name is not spoken aloud, the moment itself belongs to her. So, what does Chasca mean to us now, in the 21st century, far from the Andes, far from the golden temples, far from the astronomer priests who tracked her movements across the sky? Why does her story still matter? Perhaps because the thing she represents, the in-between, the threshold, the moment of transition, is something that every human being experiences every single day. We all pass through our own twilights, the space between sleep and waking, the space between who we were yesterday and who we will be tomorrow, the space between grief and acceptance, between endings and beginnings, between the last light of what we are losing and the first light of what we have not yet gained. Most mythologies celebrate the extremes. The sun is at its zenith, the darkness at midnight, the hero at the peak of victory, the villain in the depths of defeat. But Chasca reminds us that the most sacred moments are often the ones in between, the moments when everything is changing, the moments when the sky holds its breath, the moments when a single point of light appears on the horizon, not bright enough to overwhelm, not dim enough to ignore, just luminous enough to suggest that something new is arriving. The Inca understood this. They built an entire theology around it. They placed a goddess in that liminal space and said, "This matters." This gentle transition, this quiet turning of the light, this brief and shimmering passage from one state to the next, this is divine, not the blinding noon, not the absolute dark, the soft, golden, fleeting space between. Chasca is still up there, of course. Venus has not stopped its ancient cycle. It still appears before sunrise, burning fierce and solitary against the lightening sky. It still appears after sunset, hanging over the mountains as the last color drains from the west. It still belongs to the threshold. It still belongs to the in-between. And if you go outside tomorrow morning, just before dawn, and look to the east, and see a single bright point of light hanging low over the horizon, you will be seeing exactly what the Incas saw. You will be looking at the long-haired star, the gentle aspect of the sun, the guardian of flowers and maidens, and the sacred beauty of things that are about to change. You will be looking at Chasca, and if you are very quiet and very still, and the morning is clear, you might, for just a moment, understand what the Inca understood: that the most beautiful light in the universe is not the strongest one. It is the one that arrives at the exact moment when you need it most, when the darkness is lifting, when the day has not yet declared itself, when everything is possible and nothing has been decided, and the sky is painted in colors that will never appear again in exactly the same way, not tomorrow, not ever. That is Chasca's domain, the unrepeatable moment, the sacred threshold, the goddess of twilight. And now, if the evening is coming where you are, or if the morning is near, take a breath. Let the story settle and know that somewhere, high in the Andes, a farmer is watching the sky. And somewhere, in the remains of a golden temple, the old stones are holding the memory of a goddess who was never really gone. She was just waiting, the way the dawn always waits, for someone to look up and notice the light. The Inca knew that the universe was a conversation, a constant exchange between sun and moon, between light and shadow, between the world above and the world below. And at the center of that conversation, standing in the narrow golden space where day meets night, was Chasca. She was not the loudest voice. She was not the most powerful. But she was, perhaps, the most necessary, because without the transition, without the bridge, without the gentle hand that guides the world from one state to the next, the sun would simply vanish, and the darkness would simply arrive, and there would be no beauty in the change. No grace, no softness, no time to adjust, to appreciate, to say goodbye to what was or hello to what is coming. Chasca gave the world that gift. She stood in the doorway between one kind of light and another and made the passage beautiful. She scattered dew across the fields at dawn and pulled the colors of sunset through the clouds at dusk. She watched over the young women who embodied potential and possibility. She drew the flowers from the soil with a light so gentle that even the most delicate petals could open without fear. She was the goddess of the in-between, and in a world that so often demands that we choose sides, that we belong fully to the light or fully to the dark, that we are one thing or another with no room for ambiguity. Her story is a quiet, persistent reminder that the most sacred space in the universe might be the threshold, the doorway, the moment just before the change. Consider for a moment the sheer persistence of her memory. Over 500 years have passed since the Spanish conquest shattered the Inca Empire and melted down the golden walls of the Coricancha. Generations of colonial administrators and missionaries worked systematically to erase every trace of the old religion. They burned the quipas, the knotted strings that served as the Incas' record-keeping system. They demolished the temples. They punished anyone caught performing the old rites. And yet, Chasca endures, not as a museum piece or a dusty footnote in an anthropology textbook, but as a living presence in the culture of the Andean people. Her name is given to children. Her star is still watched by farmers. Her festivals, however transformed, are still celebrated. The Quechua language, which carries her name and her story, is still spoken by roughly 8 to 10 million people across Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and other Andean nations. She persists the way dawn persists, quietly, inevitably, without fanfare, but with a reliability that borders on the miraculous. And there is something deeply appropriate about that, a goddess who embodies gentleness and transition, and the soft power of change was never going to survive through force or spectacle. She was going to survive the way she always existed, in the margins, in the thresholds, in the quiet spaces between one world and the next. She was going to survive in the language people whispered when no one was listening, in the observations farmers made when they looked at the Pleiades, in the way a grandmother told her grandchild to look at the bright star hanging over the mountains at dawn. Chasca did not need golden temples to remain alive. She only needed someone to remember her name and look up at the sky. The long-haired star still rises. The twilight still comes. And somewhere, in the language of a people who refuse to let their gods die, the word Chasca still means star. Rest now, if you are tired. The goddess of the gentle light is watching.